As we head into the Marquette game, the Dan Hurley talk just seems to never stop. Guess what? You're locked on UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a moment to say how thankful we are for all of you. We appreciate your support. We're proud to say we're the only podcast covering UConn men's and women's basketball, the hoops capital of the world, and we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. And to show that gratitude, we're giving back. We're donating 10% of our revenue to Husky Ticket Project, helping send kids to UConn games. We just sent 50 kids to the game against DePaul. I'm sure they had a great time. Super looking forward to getting those pictures, and so I can post them on social media. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, we bring in the one sane voice in the national media over this Dan Hurley situation, and it's not just because he's a UConn guy. I feel like I've seen him defend Tom Izzo and others in the same situation. Let's bring him to the program. Get his unmuted Aaron Torres. Aaron, I know you're a UConn guy. I know you graduated from there, and you know you do tons of stuff on Dan and UConn as a whole. But why do you think this whole situation with Dan Hurley just doesn't go away, even after a win against DePaul, where by anyone's standards he was timid and probably had one blow up where it led to nothing?
So a couple things. First of all, I appreciate you saying both a sane media member, but then also but also giving the preface of, yeah, you're a UConn guy. For people who don't know my background, grew up in Connecticut, did go to UConn, have a diploma on the wall right in front of me right now. And so, yeah, like I would have gotten that out of the way if you didn't, because I don't want, Torres is just defending him because he's he wouldn't do it. And it's like, no. It's like,
no, that's my job.
Yeah. Well, my whole thing is like, look, here's the bottom line is that, first of all, we're in a post feelings world. Like, 2-3 years ago, we had to step on eggshells. We can't hurt anybody's. It's like, no. I think the world is getting back to a more centrist place. But I think more importantly is exactly what you said is like, I didn't care when Nick Saban yelled at his players. I didn't care when Nick Saban yelled at his assistants. I didn't care when Nick Saban yelled at the media. Same with Tom Izzo. By the way, as I've told you many times, I was at I was at the Kansas Duke game earlier this year where the big screen caught Bill Self, maybe not screaming, but very adamantly letting the referee know that he had, quote, no effing idea what he was effing doing. And so, listen, I think it's a few things. Is one, I think anybody who's actually played sports at a high level knows, hey, listen, the world is changing. Coaches, I don't think the Jim Calhoun, Bob Knight model necessarily is as prevalent in 2024, 2025. But I also would say, like, people are going to raise their voice. People are mad. And whether it's a coach to a player to a ref, or a ref back to a coach, it's going to happen. And so I know we're covering a lot of ground here, but I would just say very quickly is, one is that, as Dan Hurley said after, I guess it was in that 24/7 interview, he said, my players love me, my fans love me, whatever. And as somebody who's been to practices, I used to have Hassan Diarra on my show every week last year. I can promise you the players do in fact love him. And you have the pulse of the fans better than anybody in the media, Mark, and you know that the fans love him. And so if the fans don't care, if the players know what they're signing up for, I have no bigger issue. I'm going to stop talking, but I do think there's a secondary conversation about exactly what you said. Why does this continue to be a story? Because I know I have takes on that too.
No, but I also feel like, and I appreciate the perspective. I think for us, like, I think some fans are tired of hearing about it. UConn fans are, in particular, when whether it's Field of 68 or other entities go back and say, well, now, think about Maui. It's like Maui feels like it was, 2 years ago? It's such a long time ago. It's the beginning of the season. This is like pre-Maui, post-Maui. We're post-Maui. And to still talk about what transpired on the island that Dan probably doesn't ever say anymore is kind of silly. Like, even if you just took it to Dan should have done one of these instead of saying I'm the best coach in the effing game, he probably should have done what Coach Krzyzewski does, which is do this. Yeah. And then Coach K would say, hey, I'm the best effing coach in the game. Don't big time me. And then no one would care. Like, he's got to learn to do that. Like, that's that's the only change I want from Dan Hurley is just do the Bill Belichick, get your big, menu. I don't have a menu here above your mouth, and just cover your mouth when you say things to officials, because as we had Dan Dockich on yesterday talking about,
I love Dan.
Talking about how when he was at Indiana, there was a camera that was always on Bob Knight, and you're in the business, you know how this works. Just from a reaction standpoint, if it's a big SEC football game and they're getting ready to kick a field goal to win the game, and your team loses the game, who do they show? Do they show the elation of the fans first? No, they show the person like this.
Yeah,
because they either lost a bet or they're a fan of the team. That's what this is. Dan's got to learn that aspect of it. I don't want him to change at all. I want him to learn how to cover his mouth and be the same person that he is, because no one wants him to change. No one in UConn land wants him to change at all.
Well, three things really. One, first of all, there are a disproportionate number of Duke fans that seem to care about what's going on with UConn. And, the whole Coach K never acted like this. The old joke in coaching circles was, every coach, I think I'm paraphrasing, but every coach wants to get the call. Coach K and Jim Calhoun were the only coaches that expected every call. In other words, like, didn't matter if it went against you, the refs were hearing it. So that's one. Two, with Hurley, listen, I think you just said the most important part. And this is what I keep going back to. Listen, I can dislike an individual moment while also appreciating any human being who is genuinely, authentically themselves all the time. And so the bottom line is that if, listen, somebody in Dan's circle could say, dude, cut it out. But then he's not Dan Hurley. Then he is not the guy that just won back-to-back national championships and is as driven as he's ever been to win a third straight. And we know things aren't going well this year, but a third one to go along with the first two. That is what makes him him. And by the way, everybody's a little bit different. That's okay. Tony Bennett was quiet and cerebral on the sidelines. That's okay, because that was authentically him. Right. Roy Williams, same thing. Shaka Smart, when he's getting in a defensive stance, that's authentically him. That's not, and Dan Hurley has to be authentically himself. Finally, I just want to get this point across, is that you asked me to lead the segment. Why does this keep becoming a topic? And it's the simplest answer in the world. What's the old saying? They don't boo nobodies. Like that. That's what it is that people care. And I've said this on my show a few times, I think it's great for college basketball, because college basketball, since Coach K left, doesn't really have a villain. It's just, Calipari's old and he's not winning. Gonzaga's taking a step back. Nobody knows anything about John Shire. Nobody knows anything about Hubert Davis, Mick Cronin, but nobody really cares about Mick Cronin. Nobody cares about UCLA. And so we care because Dan Hurley's one of the few people that moves the needle in college basketball in 2025. I hate to say it. I love college basketball, but it's the truth. Dan Hurley's the only guy that gets an invite to the Pat McAfee show in college basketball, the only guy that gets an invite to the Colin Cowherd show in college basketball. And so he's a villain. It's good for college basketball. And I think the biggest thing is, too, I think he genuinely enjoys embracing the role of the villain. And that's why you keep seeing people bring it up, because it's something that people care enough to have an opinion on.
I agree with that. And, so thank you to all the people who are emphasizing it. Then keeping what you said. You said they don't boo nobodies. I know it's a terrible messenger, but I think Robert Saleh said it in Hard Knocks or something like that. If you don't have haters, or you're not popping. So
there you go.
That's but it's the truth. And Dan also said this in his post game, or it might have been media availability, and then we'll get to the next segment, which is kind of appreciate the early Duke teams and what they had to go through when they went on the road.
And he had a front row seat to it, obviously, with his brother.
And so that's what they are right now. They're I know Duke fans will hate this, but they're the new Duke. I mean, it's just it is what it is. Everyone gives you your best shot. DePaul is a mediocre team that played like their hair was on fire against UConn. So
can I add one tiny thing? I know the show is scripted and you don't like to go too long, and I can't shut up.
Brother.
I will say this, and I truly believe it to my core. I believe the fact that ESPN, and I understand I'm wearing a Fox Sports jacket right here. I think the fact that ESPN does not have a relationship with the Big East makes it a little easier to criticize Dan Hurley, right? If Jay Billis and all these guys had to go into prep meetings once a month with that guy,
it's true.
I think it does make a difference. And let's take it out of UConn. You're a UConn guy. I'm a UConn guy. Think about how Ryan Day was talked about at Ohio State. And by the way, I think fans were right on that, but that's another conversation until they actually made that run in the playoff. It's like, it's easy to criticize Ryan Day when you don't broadcast any of his games until the college football playoff. And so, listen, I think sometimes, the ESPN stuff is overdone, but I think it is kind of easy to just go on. And oh, by the way, and it's easy for ESPN to ignore just when UConn's playing well because, they're not part of our network. But when we need something to talk about, when we need something to debate in February when football's done, well, Dan Hurley's Dan Hurley will give us a topic on a Wednesday or, a college game day topic on a Saturday. And so it sounds crazy, and I'm not trying to be Mr. Fox guy, and I'm not speaking on behalf of all of Fox, but I just think that's a variable of it as well.
I agree. He's Aaron Torres. I'm Mark Snetta. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with more Locked On UConn after this. Attending an NFL playoff game has got to be an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's a memory I'll never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. I use Game Time Picks to grab tickets for an upcoming playoff game, and it couldn't have been any easier. I found a super deal that gave me an incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets are backed by the guaranteed Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. You have on-ticket delivery, lowest price guarantee. You even had event cancellation and job loss protection. Absolute no-brainer. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms may apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with Fox Sports' Aaron Torres and of the Aaron Torres Podcast. All right, so I think we spoke enough about Dan. We could do probably another hour on the silliness of it all, but I'm going to get on to Marquette. They are playing tomorrow against what will be probably their toughest opponent to date, at least in Big East play. It's on the road. What do you see from? Do you think this team, with or without Liam McNeely, has an opportunity to steal one in Milwaukee?
So listen, it's cliche. You never count out the heart of a champion. But I think it's going to be tough. And I think it's going to be tough just for what we've seen really, last 3 or 4 games. I know they beat DePaul and whatever, but it's just, I think in the discourse about UConn, it's important to remember that they are without a lottery pick, but it is also worth noting, they haven't been playing really well. And listen, I'm not going to sit here and yell and scream because they survived against a not very good DePaul team. As you said, Mark, and I think it's fair. They always get the best from an opponent. But listen, there are trends now that are indisputable. I mean, Alex Karaban, I feel bad, but, he's struggling right now. Doesn't mean he can't turn it around. Doesn't mean that he can't have the game of his life. But, who are you getting consistency from offensively outside of solo ball right now? I mean, it's just the truth. Defensively, we know that the team isn't good enough. I think there's certain guys, and again, I'm not being critical, but this is just a reality. Samson Johnson, is up and down. Jalen Stewart was great against DePaul, but obviously I don't think we're at the point yet where we can expect that consistently, considering that he had 4 points combined in the previous 2 games. Not a knock on Jalen, just a reality. But I just bring it up to say, I just think it's tough. And then lastly, I would just say this, especially with the way Marquette plays, they force a lot of turnovers. They take care of the basketball themselves. UConn isn't necessarily built to handle and have success with a team like that, especially without Liam McNeely. So I would have to give, hate to say it, hate to ruin everybody's Friday morning here, but I would have to give the edge to Marquette there on the road.
I would also give the edge to Marquette, but a couple encouraging things from the DePaul game, and I'll get your reaction from this. And this also matches up with what Evan Miyakawa said to us on our program a couple weeks ago about how the metrics don't love Jalen Stewart. He was 6 of 7 from the floor. He had 15 points and 4 rebounds, but he was -5 in the plus minus analytics of that game. You know who was plus 12, who gave you 0 points? Jaden Ross. So in terms of kind of how this all plays out, I think that's something that fans need to understand. Like, look at the analytics are what they are. The plus minus of a game is when a guy enters the game, the outcome is greater with him in there than when he's out of the game. So Samson Johnson, to your point, not a great day, -6 in the plus minus. But Alex Garabin was plus 11. Solo Ball was plus 10. Terrace Reed Jr. was plus 17.
What a game. Big Hoss.
Aiden Mahaney plus 7. Hassan Diarra, Gimpy.
Can I say
plus
something
9.
real quick?
Go ahead.
So I was somebody that was vocally critical, like many, of Aiden Mahaney earlier in the season. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that he's the perfect player, but the one thing I don't question when he steps on the court is he gives a damn. He plays really hard. He's limited. He's 6'2", 6'3", whatever. He plays hard. And so, that's one kid that, sometimes the effort wanes from certain guys. I feel like, I don't know when, but it just feels like that kid over the last, probably since the Providence game. I know he had some bad games statistically, but he plays hard, man. And again, limited, athletically, and I'm not trying to reiterate the same point, but he brings it. I thought he gave some good energy, especially in that DePaul game.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's, to me, after the loss to Xavier, I was actually more encouraged by this team than I've ever been all year, because the effort was there. The DePaul game, I would say the first half effort was not great. But I always harken back to, like, we talk about how Dan Hurley is authentically him and how he doesn't BS the media. He's very candid about his team. And I've said this to you off air in text messages, where sometimes he sends these coded messages that are like, hey, this team is starting to piss me off. And he doesn't quite say it in the media, but he tells you. You can read between the lines. So I say that to say, this team, even though they frustrated fans to the point they were boo birds in Hartford, which is insane, in the first half of that game, they still care. Like this, it's just different than what these fans and what fans at home are watching, because the players aren't as good. Like, it's as simple as that. It's really as simple as it's not as talented of a team. Like, if you go position by position, you can still win a national championship without having an all-time team like UConn did last year,
of course,
or a year before. So I think that, to me, is what Dan is constantly trying to say, which is, you guys know that we lost 4 incredible players, right? And we brought in guys that we thought would replace them that haven't particularly jived yet, and then you're dealing with injuries. So it's like a perfect storm of having a mediocre season.
Well, and I like that. I don't like it, but it is the reality. I think that's exactly right. It's the perfect storm, because, listen, we all, anybody listening to this show loves UConn, but obviously, being on the national scene, I have people all the time, fans of other teams, and it's not always negative with UConn. It's just, hey, what's going on? Hey, you lost to Xavier. Xavier's okay, but what's going on? Butler overtime, whatever. And I have to start with, they don't have a lottery pick right now. Like, I can't think, but I can't think of a team like who, I don't know who's good besides Duke with Cooper Flagg. I'm trying to think like who's good that has a lottery.
Like Auburn, for example, without John A. Broome, can they win a national championship? Yes, but are they a dominant force? And they probably would drop from a 1 to a 2 seed without John A. Broome in a heartbeat. And you could say the same thing with Iowa State. I can't think of his the point
Curtis
guard
Jones?
off the top of my Curtis Jones. Okay, Marquette without Cam Jones, like. If you lose your best player,
how about this?
That's what Liam is.
How about this? Kansas almost lost at home to UCF without DeJuan Harris the other night.
Yes.
And different kind of player, but same importance to that team. So I just, it like.
Let me ask you this question real quick,
Aaron,
because I was texting with a buddy of mine at the first half of the game the other night with DePaul, and typically frustrated, and as we all were. But he was just like, man, we just need like some more fire. And I said, let me ask you a question, because I agree this is the truth. And you tell me if I'm wrong. Even if Cam Spencer had an extra year of eligibility and he was on this team is, and they lose Liam, this team is holding water. Maybe they win 1 or 2 more games in this stretch. Maybe they're 4-3 now without Liam. Maybe they're 5-2. Maybe they're 6-1. I just don't think with the defensive issues that they've had at the rim, a guy like Cam, who's I love Cam Spencer. This is not even a knock on Cam, but if you don't have the defensive stopper on the ball like you had with Steph, and you don't have Mr. Eraser down low with Donovan Clingan at 7-2, and these are your 2 bigs, it still would look similar. You may get one more win. You may make you feel better because Cam is fiery, but the team isn't that much better. Do you agree or disagree?
So no, I agree. And it was funny. I think on the DePaul broadcast, Fanta, who does an awesome job, love Fanta, but I think it might have been the DePaul game, might have been one of the other ones, but they said, well, what's the biggest? Why is the defense struggling? And the analyst was like, well, you did lose a 7'2" monster in the middle, right. And I'll say, like, I just go back to last year. Is I remember Hassan consistently on my show saying Donovan Clingan is the most impactful player, and you think about it and it. But, you kind of sit there and you look at some other teams, and then you have a game like Illinois in the Elite Eight where it's just like literally they keep attacking him and literally they keep getting stuff back, and then it's a 30-0 run. So I tend to agree with you I think, listen, let's just look at the facts. Okay, so Maui was a bad week. After Maui, they went, 8-0? Yeah, with Liam in the lineup, if you include that DePaul game where he gets hurt. By the way, I know Gonzaga's struggling a little bit, Baylor, whatever. You won at Texas. Texas is a good team. You
wins
beat Gonzaga.
Wins.
Yeah, you beat Gonzaga on a neutral. So you won a couple Big East road games, which are never easy. So I'm with you. I don't think if Liam is not playing and Donovan doesn't choose to come back for another year of eligibility, which was clearly never going to happen, no, I don't think it makes that much of a difference because, again, the team is fundamentally flawed. And that's okay. Like it happens. But any team without a guy the caliber of Liam McNeely is going to look a lot different when he is not available.
And I'll remind UConn fans, because this is a true UConn show. This isn't I'm kind of a UConn fan, but I also do college basketball type stuff. This is a true UConn show. You know which 2 teams were fundamentally flawed that won national championships? The 2011 and the 2014 teams that won national championships. So it's not all doom and gloom. This team is still talented. As Dan said, with Liam, they were at that top 10, top 12, 15 range, and right there with the rest of the folks as a team that you don't want to see. And if Liam can get back to that, this team is going to be dangerous down the stretch. Let's move on to the next segment, which is how hard is it to find consistency and toughness mid-season? Does a tiger change his stripes? We're going to talk about that with Aaron Torres of Fox Sports after this. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn. He's Aaron Torres of Fox Sports and the Aaron Torres Podcast. Tell everyone where they can find you, Aaron. I know obviously you're a national name, but people can find you on YouTube and where else you can give us. You can give us a promo.
Yeah, I host the Aaron Torres Podcast. It's 4 times a week, talking all things really college sports. And obviously this time of year, it's a lot of college basketball. It's a really fun time of year as far as I'm concerned. Host Fox Sports Radio every weekend. And then on Twitter, Aaron_Torres. We also have our team specific page, Torres on UConn. We have a lot of those. It is a idea that I had to get content out. I do not run 13 or 14 different social media pages. I do not have the time. I have a wife. I don't really have a family. I don't have kids, but I have a wife. I have a dog. I have a business to run. I don't have time to run all of them. But if you are a UConn fan, Torres on UConn, also Aaron_Torres. And yeah, just really kind of covering the national college basketball scene. And obviously, you get an NFL tweet here and there, especially this time of year. So
for sure. Well, good. Make sure you go check out everything that Aaron does. I made a decision to use an analogy for this segment, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because it's about the topic of, does a tiger change his stripes, or can, does may not change their stripes, but they can adjust their behavior. So this team as a whole right now, with or without Liam McNeely, reminds me of Rocky, the mythical figure from Sylvester Stallone's series of Rocky, Creed, all that stuff. Rocky learned how to slip jabs in Rocky 3 and be like a shifty fighter in that movie. But who was Rocky at his heart? A bruiser. He would take 3 or 4 slugs to the face before he would get inside and then fight. And that was the story of him. He was the underdog. He needed to feel that pain to then kind of motivate himself going forward. That's what this team reminds me of. They do not get off to quick starts. They're not flashy. They don't do what the old UConn team did last year or the year before, and 30-0 runs, 22-1, 10-0 runs constantly. Do you think this team is ever going to change, or do you think that this is just their identity now?
So this is my take on that, and it might be too late this season, but I believe if it's going to happen, it has to come within the 13 scholarship players. I don't believe, Dan Hurley has done everything he can to get his mindset into those players. I mean, listen, they've been together since June. Literally left practice to go interview with the Lakers. This group was practicing in June. And so there's only so many times you can hear it from the coach. And I'm not saying that because I know some non-UConn fans will take this as, oh, his message isn't getting across and his way of doing things is wrong. And my coach doesn't yell, so we're great and you suck. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, it's freaking February, man. I mean, not technically, but by the Marquette game, it will be February. It is going to take somebody in that locker room. And I don't know who it is at this point. Caravan, it doesn't feel like has that personality. Maybe it's McNeely. He's just got to be healthy. You can't make the club in the tub, and it's like you can only do so much if you're not healthy and contributing. I think Hassan wants to be that guy, but again, and I love Hassan, but he's kind of a role player-ish type guy. When Cam Spencer's dropping 18 a game, he can get in somebody's face and let them know that what they're doing isn't acceptable. Say, obviously years past, Adama Sanogo, whatever. And so it's like, I just bring it up because every team and every person has different personalities. I just do wonder who's that guy in the locker room right now that when somebody doesn't dive on a floor for the loose ball, somebody doesn't do that, is going to get in their face, because Dan Hurley has done everything I think he can to this point. And now it's on somebody else to just say enough is enough. And so that's where it would have to come from. By the way, maybe it's somebody I haven't mentioned, maybe Solo Ball, who's obviously been unbelievable this year. But I think it's got to be player-led at this point. I think Dan and his staff have done what they can, and it's on the players to kind of show that toughness and to really play to that UConn standard.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, you mentioned him. I think Solo is bringing a little more swagger to the team. The block that he had in that dunk, and then it right back with a give and go with Alex for a 3. And then the next time down, he hits a 4-point play. Like his ability to get buckets quickly is also being accentuated by the fact that his defense is improving, and he's not as big of a liability. As Dan said, he's a freak of nature. He's athletic. He may be 6'3", but he has a 6'10" wingspan, big hands. He can jump through the moon. Like the dude's an athlete. And so he just needs to go out there and make athletic plays and stop getting in his head so much. A lot of his defensive issues is paralysis by analysis. It's just go out there and play, stop your man, stay in front of him. It is what it is. I think you're right. I think Haas is is trying. He's also banged up. His ankle is completely fried. His knees hurt. He's limping out there. He's taking charges on a gimpy ankle. Caravan, same thing.
Real quick,
the
that
Warriors
should
are
inspire.
there.
That should inspire the other guys, though. Smallest dude on the team, fighting his what off on one leg, one ankle, whatever. That should. And I'm not going to name any individual because everybody I think is.
But you know what? Let me ask you this, because I think this team as a whole, and I love them because there's a lot of ways you can skin a cat. I'm not this way. Tony Dungy was a great coach, but he was very quiet, right?
Sure.
He did things. He was a great leader, but he was still quiet. I think we have a bunch of Tony Dungys on this team. There's not a Dan Hurley in the bunch of them. Dan Hurley's the Dan Hurley. I mean, if you go down the line, Terrace Reed may yell at once, but he's kind of a quiet dude who plays an instrument. He's trying to get him to be like aggressive, and he was last night. He brought the energy. Solo has a little bit of fire in him, but it's more swagger-esque than it is in your face. Same thing with Jalen Stewart. So like, I just don't see a guy that's going to just change like that. Like, it's just I think we just have to live with this personality being not a typical Dan Hurley type team. That's just my thought.
I like how Terrace Reed plays an instrument, so he can't be tough. It's like, he's over there just, bopping away on his saxophone, and it's like, oh, this guy's too soft. No, I know exactly what you're saying. No, I agree. And again, and it's tough because, even a guy like Cam Spencer, the culture was already established, and I just think he took it to another level, and I think he fit within that culture where it's like, I don't think that there's just a Cam Spencer out there that's going to, whoever's back next year, that's going to bring it out of other people. So I'm with you. I think this is kind of the identity of this team. But what I would also say is, even if they're maybe not as mentally tough or resilient or whatever, I keep going back to what we just said a minute ago. 8-0 post Maui with Liam McNeely in the starting lineup. And so the biggest games are still ahead. 2 games with Marquette, 2 games with St. John's, at Creighton, Villanova at home. And we don't know when Liam's going to be back. So I'm not saying, he'll be back Saturday and the whole season will change. But I don't think you can fully evaluate who this team is, what their floor is, what their ceiling is without seeing them at their best, assuming Liam's back. Like if he was out for the year, then we have to recalibrate, but he's not out for the year, at least not that I'm aware of. And so because of it, I just sit there and say it's hard for me to go all in on any blanket statement on this team without seeing them at close to 100%.
Last question, and then we'll get you out of here. I asked this to I asked it to Evan Maya. I asked it to a couple other folks. Why does Duke, who is obviously having a phenomenal year, and this is about ACC Big East stuff, because if we're talking about losing a player, why does a team like Duke not get knocked for playing in the 5th best conference in the country? Is it because they're killing everyone, or is it because the conference is just that bad? That's my question.
Ooh. So I had to take a really strong take at 8:45 Eastern time on Thursday that I was about to put on social media that I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't, because I had a busy day and I didn't have time to just argue with people all day. I'm going to say it. By the way, preface this by saying I had Bruce Pearl on my podcast this week, so maybe it's whatever. But I said this even before I had Pearl on the show. I think the Cooper Flag has surpassed Janai Broome as National Player of the Year take is a completely manufactured by the media take. And listen, the counter would be Duke is the only team to beat Auburn, and Cooper Flag's playing really well. But Auburn has, at last check, 12 quad 1 wins. Okay, I think the number one, well, I don't know, you could tell me what UConn had on Selection Sunday last year, but I think it was 2 years ago, Alabama, as the number 1 overall seed in the tournament, had 12 quad 1 wins on Selection Sunday. Okay, so they have played quite literally the toughest schedule. They have beaten the 2 best teams in the Big 12. That's obviously Houston and Iowa State. That's they've beaten maybe the best team in the Big 10, Purdue. So this isn't locked on Auburn. We don't have to get into that talk, but it's just I feel like either there's clear Duke bias, or people just wanted to manufacture a conversation when Janai Broome hurt his ankle, and I think they assumed he was going to be out for 2 months, and we got to give this to Cooper Flag. So I just bring it up to very simply say that I think it's okay to and I'm all over the place.
You're fine,
but
bro.
I agree with you. I think, first of all, I heard something like, oh, Duke's trying to go undefeated in league play for the first time since 1999. It's like, well, yeah, there were real teams in the ACC back then. UConn fans know all about the 1999 Duke team, but that's another conversation for another day. But that was a real league. This year, the league is not good. There's 20 games, which makes it a different deal. And oh, by the way, of the 3 best teams that Duke has played, they lost to 2 of them. They lost to Kansas, they lost to Kentucky on neutral courts, and they beat Auburn. Congratulations. But
at home.
Yeah, exactly. And I totally agree. And again, I do think there is Duke bias, by the way. And I just did a whole show on this before we went live. The idea that game day went back to UNC Duke when UNC is terrible. Instead, I think instead of Arkansas, Calipari's return to Lexington is preposterous. And people are like, oh, people care about Duke Carolina. I'm like, they're going to care about this Carolina team that's 13-9 and needed overtime to just beat Boston College at home and then lost to Pitt and before that lost to Stanford at home. Give me a freaking break. So yes, if there's any doubt that Duke bias exists, or maybe not bias, but a push to make them relevant, like that's what I feel like more than anything is like ESPN's like, oh crap, we got one more week of football. What do? We have to make Duke relevant. And Colin Cowherd says this all the time. He goes, it's not my job to make you interesting. You either are interesting or you're not. And I feel like there has been such a push the last 2 or 3 weeks. We have to make Cooper Flagg a thing. We have to make Cooper Flagg a thing. It's like, I don't know. I think Auburn's a pretty good story. I think Dan Hurley yelling is at least interesting.
Right.
I don't think Duke beating Miami and Boston College is that interesting. I'm sorry, but it's being pushed down our throats.
But what I can tell you too is, you're from a basketball standpoint, whether it's the best story or not, you're starting to see the chinks in Duke's armor over the last few games. They were down against Wake Forest late. They pulled that one out of their whats, and then NC State comes to Cameron and just looks like the greatest team of all time and had no fear. They were up, I think 14 at one point, 11, something like that. And of course it's Cameron. So you're going to see that slow drag back to the middle. And then they ended up eking that game out. So that was a 9-10 NC State team. That is a terrible, terrible basketball team. Has some talent, but they're not going to make the Final Four this year, like with their magical run last year. So, and before that, they had some trouble against, I believe, a little bit of just at the beginning of the BC game until they went crazy. So you're seeing Duke away from home and even Duke at home against a team that can get hot, maybe having some issues. I mean, Kalo Malich gets throws up on the court. They're having cramping issues. Everyone's having to play a crap ton of minutes. They're not as deep as everyone thinks. And to me, this Duke team is flawed. And I think part of that is because you're relying on kids. I mean, these 17, 18-year-old kids, I don't think that's the recipe for a national championship. They may get to the Final Four, but I wouldn't mind seeing them in a regional final. I can tell you that.
Well, I'll just say this really quick. 2 things can be true. By the end of the year, they're going to have a resume that's going to get them the number 1 seed in the East. That's just going to happen. We just,
it's in Raleigh too.
Yeah. Raleigh to I think either Newark or one of the Jersey areas.
Yep.
And that's going to happen. What is also true is like when people, because I think there are other media outlets that are again trying to push like, is Duke actually the best team? It's like, I don't think Duke's as good as Alabama. I don't think they're as good as Florida. I don't think they're as good as Iowa State. I don't think they're as good as Auburn. I know they beat Auburn. Okay, cool. The game isn't going to be played again at Cameron Indoor the next time they play. I don't think they're as good as Houston. I think I just said Houston. So I think Duke's like a top 8-9 team. But again, because they play in a mediocre conference and because the networks need something to talk about, it just feels like they're being shoved down our throats. I think they're a perfectly fine team. By the way, the other thing is, too, when they play good teams, everyone's got the book on Cooper Flagg. He does that weird, spin twist into the middle that gets stopped by everyone with a pulse. So anyway, it's just, it is what it is. It's going to be what it is until they get knocked out of the tournament. And then, but whatever. But I think to the original question that you asked before I went on an 8-minute diatribe, yes, I think there is definitely some Duke bias here in the media. So
without a doubt, but that's okay. UConn, by the way, had 13 quad 1 wins in when the season was going to Selection Sunday. Auburn could definitely break that this year because they have plenty of opportunities.
Auburn has 12. It's not even
right now.
February 1st yet.
Right. So They could also lose a bunch of quad one games too, so it could look very different. And the SEC is a tough league. So
let me put it this way really quick: is Auburn would have a pathway in the NCAA tournament if they get the number 1 seed in the South through Atlanta. For people who don't know the geography, that's a 50 to 60-minute drive from Auburn's campus. Duke would have a pathway through Newark, through Raleigh, as you said. If I had to bet money, I wouldn't even hesitate today. Who's more likely to make the Final Four with the very advantageous path? I would absolutely take Auburn. So
there you go.
That's Locked On That's Locked On Auburn with Mark Zanetto. See you next time where we break down the spring depth chart. Yeah,
we'll get Zach Blackerby on, my Auburn guy, if we need him for next show. All right, listen, Aaron, thanks for jumping on the show. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, for Aaron Torres of Fox Sports and the Aaron Torres Podcast. Stay locked in, stay connected, make sure those toughness meters are always rising, and as always, go Huskies.
Go Huskies.